Growing up playing games in the 90s, it's always amazing to go back today and play some of these old games from my childhood, re-experiencing old titles on the hardware we had back then. Going back to Resident Evil 1 in our retrospective video we posted some months ago really highlighted how far technology had come from visuals, audio, and even game design. Resident Evil 1 was a stellar game back in the day, but by today's standards, it definitely looks a bit dated. Hell, even the jump from the 5th generation of consoles like Nintendo 64 and PlayStation 1 to the 6th generation from PlayStation 2, Dreamcast, and GameCube shows just how far a leap in technology is actually made. Even in just 6 years, Resident Evil 1 goes from looking like this to this. Introducing Resident Evil 1 Remake / Remaster HD. Released on the GameCube originally in 2002, and then released with an AI-enhanced visual update in 2015 for the modern hardware like PS4 and Xbox One. In the sliding scale of remakes, even seen with later additions in the Resident Evil franchise, Resident Evil Remake is by far the gold standard for how this should be done, taking the original formula from what made the original so beloved and adding on top better visuals, better audio, gameplay tweaks, and enhanced puzzles, while keeping the core experience basically the same. For anyone looking to get into the Resident Evil franchise to see where it all began, this one is definitely my go-to answer for what they should play first. In this video, I want to get into the differences between the two games, the original and the remake, what changes were actually made, and if they affect the core of the original title. So if you like this type of retrospective content, please consider subscribing to the channel. I would greatly appreciate it, and it would make me a very happy boy. But for now, let's dive into what makes Resident Evil Remastered the gold standard in game revisitation. For better or for worse, remakes and remasters are going to be a continuing trend in gaming from here on out, and with the role that Capcom's been on lately with the remake products it's been putting out, like Resident Evil 2 and Resident Evil 4, there's always a question that is floated out there whenever these are announced. Hell, I even see in your guys' comments, that is, how much and what should and will be changed when it comes to being remade. As diehard fans of the series, this is a very valid and all-important question that constantly comes up. That being, what are they actually going to change? It's pretty clear in the games that we loved of old are, for lack of a better word, inaccessible in today's market, due to either hardware or software costs for retro games and consoles, as these have just skyrocketed and gone through the roof. I mean, I sold a copy of Resident Evil 1 for $100 on eBay about 6 months ago. And with the forever debate of whether emulation is moral or justified, and let's be honest with ourselves, these games are just kind of inaccessible on a gameplay front. While much of the hardcore is either reminiscent or forgiving on how old games used to play, for the modern and general audience, these games are seen to be playing like crap, bouncing potential new fans off of the games that you and me love. In order to accommodate new trends, new hardware, and new inherent standards of games, concessions will have to be made. Hence the question, what is changing? In terms of Resident Evil 1, and going back to this remaster, it was honestly pretty amazing to see how well the core of the original was preserved in this remake, while also bringing in more than just a facelift and a new coat of paint to this original hallmark of the PlayStation 1. But again, the age-old question is what changed? So, let's find out. When it comes to the narrative and what you actually do in Resident Evil 1, it's basically the same. Alpha Team is sent out to the Spencer estate to respond to the disturbance and disappearance of Bravo Team. When the helicopter goes down, the group is chased into the mansion by demon dogs, forced to find a way to escape while traversing through the same area: the main mansion, guest house, courtyard, underground tunnels, and finally the laboratory. And while I do miss the original FMV cheesy-ass cutscene at the very beginning, this new rendered one is far more cinematic and does a wonderful job at setting the tone for what is to come in the game. From the helmet cameras, to the dogs gnawing on dead bodies, to the chase sequence to the house. While I love the original, that first cutscene definitely does not capture the essence and tone that this game was going for even back then, which is what this remake really nails as a whole package: the tone. Playing once again as both Jill or Chris, you're left scrounging for materials, solving puzzles, and blasting or avoiding zombies along the way. The biggest change that is obvious from the get are the visuals here. While this seems to be obvious given the amount of time between the original and the remake, it is still stunning to see the same locations in such drastic amounts of detail. Sticking with the pre-rendered backgrounds for the remake, everything looks nearly photorealistic, albeit even in this HD remaster a little washed out just because AI isn't really good at this yet, or wasn't in 2015. This time with the inclusion of dynamic lighting, depth of field, and realistic shadows crossing the walls as your character runs or walks in front of a lit candle mounted on the wall. Given the power of the PlayStation 1, one thing I did realize while playing the original was just how bright everything was, despite only seeing lit candles on the walls while also taking place at night. This was obviously done due to the limited color palette and also allowing players to see, and with given how lighting technology was in 1996, made it difficult to render realistic lighting sources and how light actually works. In the remake, however, lighting is scarce, drenching the abandoned or not so abandoned hallways in shadows, some areas only having candles lighting your way, like in the underground tunnels. Not only does it make the mansion feel more realistic, but also lends to the tension and horror vibes the original game seemed to be going for back in the day. Dark hallways and shaded corners in the house full of zombies and biomutants brings a more inherent tension to plotting through the corridors. And just this simple change in lighting does wonders to create that buildup. Coupling that with the enhanced audio, allowing for the plotting footsteps to change based off the type of surface, really brings the space to life in a way not captured in the original. Mostly just being due to technical limitations of the PlayStation 1 at the time. While Resident Evil has never been quote-unquote scary in a sense that we know horror games to be now, there is no denying the amount of tension built from the improved visuals and sound design. I played this game on PC, so with the ability to play in 16:9 in the most recent HD re-release, as well as getting up to 60 frames a second, this feels like the most definitive and beautiful way to actually play this game again. And even on console, which if I remember correctly is capped at 30 frames a second, just on the visuals alone makes this version a must if you're looking for a taste of the original. And that's just based on looks and sound alone, which I will admit does a lot of the heavy lifting here, to be fair. Gameplay in this remake has had some additions as well that not only stay true to the core of the original game, but elevate them to bring out more of what I loved from the original to the forefront. Looking back at OG Resident Evil 1, there's always discussion today about the lauded tank controls. As discussed, this control scheme is focused on holding up on the D-pad to go forward and turning with left and right as back when it originally came out. We didn't have the luxury of analog sticks, that being released a year later with the DualShock controller in '97. This method of control was further assisted by the inclusion of static camera angles, the camera essentially being in fixed positions in the rooms and halls of the mansion, with no way to move or control it. Resident Evil 1 Remake keeps these fixed angles, but also includes a control mode which was developed in order to better work with analog sticks. That being, you move the stick in the direction to which your character actually needs to walk. However, this just never felt right to me, as it always felt like I was constantly adjusting the stick to whichever way was up, but because of the camera shifts, it also just is constantly changing. So after about 20 minutes of struggling through this, I defaulted back to the standard tank controls as they just kind of felt right to me, especially having played all these original games not that long ago. One thing that I forgot existed until revisiting this game was the actually inclusion of a difficulty selector as well. As a newcomer to the series, I could see how the original Resident Evil would be considered hard, mostly due to the finality of the resources. These difficulty sliders adjust the amount of items, the amount of zombies, and how hard they actually hit for, making this an easier jumping off point for a newcomer to get their feet wet as they explore the Spencer Mansion like we did so long ago, something the original didn't have. And while shooting, moving, and interactions all remain the same, there are differences in the interactions that newcomers would never even know about, but also keeps veterans of the game and series on their toes as well, creating some changes to keep it more than just a simple retexture of the original. So let's go ahead and dive into those right now. Puzzle solving has always been the core of the original Resident Evil games. The act of finding items, solving riddles, changing or combining items with each other has always been the staple of the Resident Evil games, minus some of the entries towards the middle of the series like 5 and 6. And as this is in fact a remake of the original, the return of these puzzles seems pretty obvious. And while it probably would have been easier just to bring the puzzles over from the original as they were back in the day, I was surprised to find that almost every puzzle in this game has been slightly remixed, either changing the key items altogether, changing the solutions, or adding an additional layer to almost every puzzle. The biggest example for returning players would notice is the addition of the crypt section, requiring players to find 4 death masks scattered across the mansion in order to obtain the first shield key. While not drastically changing any of the formula, creating new barriers like this not only adds a new challenge for the player, but returning players can't just breeze their way through this entire game because they've played it 16,000 times since 1996, essentially making this game newish without disturbing what players loved about this game to begin with. Hell, even Shinji Mikami himself, who directed the original as well as the remake, says that about 70% of this game is actually different from the original, essentially keeping the bones, areas, and story the same while changing up almost everything else within. Save rooms are still in the same location, but this time the door leading back to the East Wing hallway has a loose knob, so if players use that door too many times, the knob breaks, forcing the player to take the long way up on the second floor around to head back downstairs. Another example would be the clock puzzle in the main dining area. It uses the same shield switch mechanic as the original, but in the remake you now also have to change the hands on the clock according to the picture next to it before getting the item within. While not drastic changes on the face, Resident Evil Remake is full of these slight alterations and really do its job on creating a similar but new experience for those returning fans, still attempting to puzzle and entertain both new players and vets alike. And while these aren't drastic changes, it's nice to see something a little bit different coming out of the puzzles that we've played so many times in the original game. Like I said, none of these are that hard, but change is good in this case and just keeps it fresh. But no addition is as game changing as the Crimson Heads introduced in this remake, so let's go ahead and talk about these bad boys. Whenever you killed a zombie in the original game, the zombies just lay there dead, as good zombies do. Remake, however, introduced a change that honestly made this game far more intense than its predecessor, that being the introduction of the Crimson Heads. In the remake, whenever you kill a zombie, he lies there, gathering his strength, overcoming his humiliation, until when you least expect it, he rises, sporting long talons and, you guessed it, a red head. These reanimated corpses serve to make sure that the player can never feel safe. There are ways of dealing with the Crimson Heads, that being to set them on fire using gasoline and a lighter. However, as you may guess, this combination takes up 1 to 2 item slots depending on if you're Jill or Chris, as Chris starts with the lighter permanently in his permanent slot above your inventory. With the amount of gas being finite in the mansion, it no longer becomes solely advantageous to just murder all the zombies in the halls. Gas is finite, found in gas cans scattered around the play space, and you can only carry 2 charges with you at one time. With these Crimson Heads being faster and hitting harder and much harder to kill, the decision is posed to the player if a zombie is actually worth killing and burning, killing and leaving to turn, or just running around them. I personally chose to burn zombies in key areas, around the safe rooms, in a cramped hallways, or in areas I would for sure be returning to. If I did make a kill, burning was a must, meaning I must be backtracking a ton to refill the gas cannon, hoping they didn't turn in the moments I was gone. However, most of these zombies that were easily avoidable or I knew I wasn't going to be going back to, I just kind of avoided. Of course, killing them with headshots, exploding their craniums, does the trick as well, so aim well, as headshots are still just as finicky as the original. Zombies can also break into other areas now too, so running to the next area doesn't mean you're safe. This further creation of choice made my time in this remake far more intense than even the original, where I just kind of murdered everything in my way, as I knew I'd be making my run through just that much quicker and easier at the expense of some of that sweet ammunition. The other main addition to the gameplay formula is the inclusion of defensive items like daggers and stun grenades. These items were used solely for when you're grabbed by a zombie, so when you have either of these on your person, these items are expended in order to just get out of trouble and get out of the grab, so you can either finish your opponent or run away. The dagger just stabbing them in the head, while the stun grenade allows a headshot to detonate it, blowing their heads just clean off, good for stopping those pesky Crimson Heads from returning. While there is not a ton just lying around the mansion, these get out of jail free cards can be absolute lifesavers if you're needing one, especially when you have no ammo or just a small one-time safety net. It's just a simple quality of life add-on, making this entry far more accessible for anybody today.
Take care.
Yeah.
Much like gameplay, there are small additions to the story and lore, further fleshing out the world of Resident Evil. The biggest being the addition of the side kind of tangent regarding Lisa Trevor, the daughter of the original architect of the Spencer Manor. Having been captured by Oswald Spencer, she was subjected to being tested on with the progenitor virus along with her mother. And in the remake, we get more story and lore on her, as well as we run into her mutilated form in the shack outside, as well as in the tunnels down below. I mean, there's even a boss fight with her at the end that just amounts to you pushing some rocks off of a ledge, but it still made it a little bit more interesting and having just a completely different twisted boss fight that we'd never seen before, just implanted in the middle to end of this game. While not a massive addition, it's nice to see more lore and story added to the original formula, once again having something new for returning players as well. With some expanded voice acting and reshot cutscenes, the story here holds up with the original, which given what we're going to explore in further remakes really is a good thing. Tweaks and alterations aren't necessarily bad, but nothing here was cut or greatly transformed, keeping with that original beginning plot set up so long ago. With some additional cutscenes, tweaks to cameras to make it feel a bit more cinematic, almost all the narrative we got in the original lies here in its pure distilled form. And while some innovation can be a good thing, there is a comfort to be going back to the original experience we had in 1996, albeit in a much cleaner format. And for those who are just new to the series who picked this up because they had heard such good things about Resident Evil, you don't know any different, and it's still probably pretty good for you to this day. So for further thoughts on the story, go check out the video in the timestamp above. That's the original Resident Evil retrospective, and I think it's a pretty good video myself. But with these changes, what did you guys think of the Resident Evil remake? Did you guys enjoy the new graphical overhaul, or do you still go back to the original on PlayStation 1 instead? And if you're new to the series, where did you actually start? I'm always curious as to how people jumped into Resident Evil train, so let me know in the comments down below. And if you like this video, consider hitting the like button and subscribe to the channel for more content like this. We've done every core Resident Evil game up to this point, along with other series like Wolfenstein, Dead Rising, and even some random one-offs like Sniper Elite or Squad.
You so sexy Russian girl, прыгай в мой фургон танцпол, drink shot,
After this, we're going to be exploring the rest of the remakes to finish out this long-running Resident Evil retrospective series, so stay tuned. And if you have any other games or series that you want covered on this channel, please let me know as well, as I'm always looking for new ideas. I'm already working on the next run of videos, so look forward to that here after the Resident Evil ones. And as always, my name is Brendan, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Later, taters.